So up next we have Maryann Lesert. She is a writer and the author of the novel Landmarks, a book focused on the research of fracking in Michigan State Forest. She is also a professor at Grand Rapids Community College, where she teaches creative writing and is an advocate for our natural world. Today, her focus will be on changing our climate story. Please welcome Maryann Lesert.
So I'm going to be talking today as a storyteller who does a whole lot of place-based research. Talking about our climate story, but even more so than the story of what's happening with the climate, the story of our response to what's happening with climate. So I'm going to share first my beginning in dealing with one of our unconventional fossil fuel extraction methods called horizontal hydraulic fracturing. In the 2010s, throughout the 2010s, especially in the middle, there was a little bit of a fracking boom in Michigan that a lot of people didn't know about. Partly because a lot of the fracking that was happening in our state forests. So as somebody who writes about the environment, I was very concerned about that, and I set out on what became 2 years of boots on well sites research. I literally was on every active frac well site in the state of Michigan, kind of on a tour for about 2 years. So what I'd like to do first, because we're going to be talking about our response to some of these things happening in our environment, is just give you a feel for what it feels like to come upon a frac well site in the middle of the state forest. So fracking, and I'll just do this very quickly. If anybody wants to talk more about it, I'll be at the author's table and I welcome a discussion. Basically, horizontal hydraulic fracturing is considered high volume anytime each frac job uses more than 100,000 gallons of water. This particular well site, which was in Kalkaska County, actually set, I believe, the still record for using with one frac job over 22 million gallons of water. Basically, the process, they drill first between maybe 3,000, 5,000, 2 miles down, and then drill a mile or two horizontally. And then multiple laterals can go out from one vertical well bore. There is a cocktail of water, drilling fluids, chemicals, and sand or proppants that keep the shale layers open once they basically blast it with a high degree of pressure. So again, totally paraphrased, very quick kind of look at what fracking does. But what I want to have you do is just check out the scale. So this is a 120-foot tall drill rig. Typically on a well site this size, you would have anywhere from 6 to 10 acres of the forest floor scraped, level and dry like a factory floor. And then it is filled, of course, with all kinds of drilling fluids, chemicals, sands and mixes, the energy that's brought in, compressors, you name it. You're going to hear a little bit of my writing about that in a moment. But let's take a moment to look closely at what it looks like on that forest/factory floor. And I'm just going to let you gaze. And this is a view a lot of people aren't privy to, what is behind the drill rig. You can see several pallets. There are very large chemical vats. It is protected with a 3/32 millimeter layer of plastic over the forest floor. I hear somebody laughing with me. What fracking looks like is harder to show you in the bigger scale. This is a tiny piece of it, and pardon the tree who is helping me. Again, it's hard to get really close to the fracking, but trucks are backed up to the wellhead, and what you're seeing is just one of several command trailers and hose and knot operations. Many, many hoses delivering all those fluids, and many, many compressors delivering all that pressure. So when you write about the environment, and several of our speakers, Genevieve mentioned this especially, and Dr. Rose actually talked about this too, is that, you know, a lot of times, especially in dealing with nonfiction, you're dealing with a lot of urgency and loss. We hear writers all the time talk about the loss of ice, the loss of biodiversity, these climate tipping points that we keep getting closer and closer to crossing a threshold. And then, of course, that idea of running out of time. We humans are running out of time. So it's very hard not to get caught up in the urgency and forget to look at the rest of the story. I spent some time with that urgency. During these 2 years, about 2012 to 2014, I was writing get the word out articles as fast as I could. But what I really wanted to write about, and when I decided to turn to writing Landmarks, a novel, is I wanted to write about the people I met across the state, the way they were coming together, the way they were bringing any gifts they had to educating the public about fracking, to working toward protecting water, land, air. So I want to tell you about something I refer to as the common ground experience. So the oil and gas industry nominates parcels of land that they would like to lease in mineral rights leasing auctions. And one county that was, almost all of the acreage in the county was nominated, actually. It was Barry County in southwest Michigan, right around 2012. Something like 24,000 acres of Barry County's public state game lands and rec areas were put up for auction. There is an environmental educational center there called Circle Pines, and Circle Pines opened its doors to anyone, individuals and groups. And over a period of 2 years, there were 60-some environmental groups and hundreds of individuals who gathered. Water well drillers, doctors, lawyers, indigenous community members, students, musicians, artists, writers, all coming together just to bring what they could to the common ground table. And the story I wanted to tell was about solidarity, the amazing solidarity I witnessed, and the fact that activism can be fun. It was downright fun to gather together at Circle Pines. Anytime you write about place, and I'm often described as a writer who is place-based, especially when you deal with climate, I think there's two conflicts that we deal with. One is working between joy and grief, and another is between conflicting visions of the future. So you steep yourself in place, and I was all over the state of Michigan, all over the Great Lakes area, meeting all these wonderful people, and of course experiencing the more than human world, the place itself. So what I'm going to do is turn to a little reading that will show you that juxtaposition between joy and grief, and also different versions of the future. So I'm going to read just a very short clip from chapter 5. It's called Fen Preserve. It features a slice of the narrator's past. The narrator of the novel is a college professor. She teaches an eco-lit class, and she has some really engaged students. But she also has an activist past that they don't know about. So this is a piece of her past when she and several people were trying to protect a place that actually, my fictionalized version of a place in Barry County. Fen Preserve, such a beautiful place. Even as David walked away from our efforts to save its purple-green wetlands and its glacier-carved ridges, it was the beauty of the place that I wanted to remember. The violet mist of its mornings, the hot white silver of its moonlight, the prehistoric trumpeting of cranes at dawn and dusk. Fens was a place where the landscape was inextricably intertwined with the wildlife and the people who roamed it. To separate the wetlands from the hills and prairies, to separate the geology of the place and its stories from the humans who researched, who set up easels and painted, who tagged plants and tallied flights. Such separations were impossible. So that's a version of this place. And I'm going to read from the very next chapter, the beginning, which takes place at a fictionalized version of the very real mineral rights oil and gas leasing auctions, when this same land was up for auction. And as a spectator, you're sitting behind bidders' tables, and bidders from companies all over the state of Michigan, the region, maybe even international companies, are bidding for the right to develop oil and gas on those lands. And here's what it feels like. Who could forget the oddity of sitting in a pale green room, listening to an auctioneer prattle ho and ha, as the right to drill into the geological record of life below us was sold to 40-some middle-aged men wearing khakis and plaid button-downs. So I wanted to mention some writers that have been great mentors to me in terms of healing our relationship with place and trying to carry forward and change our story with our relationship to place. Indigenous authors such as Robin Wall Kimmerer, who some of you may know for her book Braiding Sweetgrass, and Linda Hogan, another Indigenous author in the US, who any novel you pick up of Linda Hogan's will connect you to place. Aldo Leopold had coined the term our social ecological evolution, and I believe we're on that pathway. I think we're in the thick of it right now. And Kathleen Dean Moore has this wonderful phrase that she talks about when she talks about the obligation to place, and she calls that the ecology of love. And I love that phrase. So recently, I was talking with a Michigan musician and activist named Seth Bernard. Some of you may know Seth or may know his music. And he brought forth this idea that he heard at a big environmental meeting in Washington, D.C., and it was that culture changes at the speed of narrative. And if you think about it, anthropologists and social theorists talk about this all the time. Culture is a story. It's a story that we tell ourselves about the way that we live and the way that we know. So story can be a change accelerator. It can be in the arts, artists, musicians, dancers, writers, helping us place ourselves in the story, helping us place ourselves in a new way. And it's funny well, it's not so funny, that's a bad word, but as climate change organizations are reporting the fact that those tipping points are accelerating, storytellers used to be called part of the 3C arrangement: creativity, community, compassion. And interestingly enough, storytellers are now being called and welcomed into the climate crisis as change accelerators, that literally were being termed change accelerators. And I kind of like that role. I'm okay with that role. So in change accelerating, we're saying no more business as usual. We reject the story that we're all too greedy and we're too much steeped in the story of consumerism to change. We don't believe that of any of us in this room. And we're not waiting on superheroes either. Superhero stories, I think we might be obsessed with them right now because there are so many big problems. But it's amazing, like others have said in this room, how much we can do when we just stand together. When we care and we refuse to rationalize away our caring, I think that's the most important thing I have to say today. Refuse to rationalize away your caring. Act on it, and we'll all be okay. I'm going to read from you now a passage that is the end of the first chapter. The narrator, Rebecca, has just found out that one of her students has been arrested for an action that appears to be her students trying to stop what's called a super frac, a kind of mythic, very dangerous, possible fracture method where they try to fracture two levels of the bedrock simultaneously to release a bonanza of oil and gas. And as Rebecca is sitting there thinking about her own past, she's worried about her relationship to her students and how she proceeds. So I'll let her speak for herself. I had listened to their ideas on Sonia's mangy back deck and helped them shape their thoughts as they continued to write. There were times when I thought of Mara, when Mara and I were young like they were, and we acted as a pair. Perhaps I should have told Kate and Brett and Sonia and Mark more. But whatever it was I was becoming, mentor or friend, I had been their professor, and that role stuck. I was worried about influence. Now my question was, had I dropped out on them when they needed me most? For all my worry about influence, all I wanted now was a chance to intercept, to stop the messaging train. They had tried. For 2 years they had tried. With articles, with songs, with videos of the destruction we had witnessed across the state, with carefully crafted speeches and letters, by standing up at auctions and public meetings. Now they would be labeled. Anyone who didn't understand how 4 promising students in a literature class could become eco-terrorists should stand at the crest of the 12-foot-tall mound of earth surrounding a frac well site, a berm swollen with and smelling of still living roots. Let anyone quick to judge gaze across 10 acres of forest floor scraped level and dry. Let them see and hear, smell and feel the screech of the drill rig biting into brain and bone, the chug of diesel engines, the roar of compressors. Let them stand there trying to comprehend the circus of hoses and coils, the tanks and the vats, piles and piles of half-ton cylinders of steel pipe, because there is no such thing as a too long mile pipe. The pipes of drilling and fracking thunder end to end as they descend into the wellbore, segment following segment, and the drill bit grinds away. Thank you.